Welcome all for the 7th edition of the Geoscience in Remote Sensing Society Young Professionals and the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing Student Consortium Summer School. The event is promoted by the Geoscience Remote Sensing Society Brazilian chapter, together with two Santa Catarina universities, UDESC and UNO Chapecó, and we will have this year webinars, roundtables, and tutorials. The event is supported by two international societies, already mentioned, the Geoscience Remote Sensing Society, the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and their student branch, the Young Professionals one and the Student Consortium. Well, in our main webpage, please check our welcome videos recorded by our rectors and directors and the presidents of both societies. We also welcome you to answer the quiz of some particularities of Santa Catarina and Chapecó City, where this event shall take place. But due to current pandemic situation, we are running it virtually. The event has also support from our state foundation of research and technology and two private companies, the Canoinhas Geoassessorias and Instituto Gilson Volpato de Educação Científica. We have different partners from research institutes and Brazilian universities, and we had already some webinars, round tables, and for today, we invite now Professor Cibele Amaral from the Federal University of Viçosa to give the welcome message and start actually this webinar. Cibele, the room is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viraldo. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Cibele Amaral. I'm professor of remote sensing and geoprocessing at the Federal University of Viçosa in the Department of Forest Engineering. Currently, I'm also a visiting research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where I'm working with remote source data for tracking mangroves, disturbance and resilience in Central America, which includes hyperspectral and LiDAR GEDI data. Our invited research that will join us a little bit later today is Dr. Kaio Hamamura. He is PhD in Forest Research and Professor in Information Technology in the Federal Institute of Education, Science and Technology of São Paulo. He is co-author of the GEDI, an R package for downloading, visualization, and processing of GEDI data. His main field of expertise is developing algorithms and methods for analyzing remote sensing data. He's author of 8 R packages, a Python package, and a QGIS package. We have also here with us the Master Science Rodrigo Leite. Rodrigo is a PhD student in Forest Science at the Department of Forest Engineering in the Federal University of São Paulo, of Viçosa, His research interests include using remote sensing technologies for forest management, monitoring, and conservation. He is currently working with the integration of high-density UAV LiDAR point clouds with GEDI data for mapping fuel loads in the Brazilian savanna. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Laura Duncanson, who is going to talk to us about the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation, GEDI. GEDI is the newest spaceborne LiDAR sensor with immense value for forest and water research management, for carbon cycle science, among many other applications. Dr. Duncanson is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, College Park, in the Department of Geographical Sciences. As a researcher, she is focused on increasing our understanding of forest structure and dynamics using novel remote sensing technologies. She is currently engaged on the GEDI Science Team to help lead the development of empirical biomass equations for GEDI. She also serves on NASA's Carbon Monitoring System Science Team and as a co-lead of CO's Land Product Validation Biomass subgroup to work toward a consistent international protocol for global biomass product calibration and validation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Dr. Laura Duncan.
Thank you so much, Sibele. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay, so it's a great pleasure to be here with you all today. You can see my slide okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, okay. So I'm going to be talking about NASA's GEDI mission, as Sibele said, and also essentially how we're doing remote sensing of forest structures or 3D forests in 3D in general at a global scale. So I've got several co-authors listed on this slide, but there are many, many more, dozens and dozens of different researchers all across the world who've contributed to this research. And I'm also going to be sort of giving my own personal story of how I got involved with LiDAR research in the beginning, and why I am spending my life studying these LiDAR waveforms. So to give a little bit of context to the reason that we're interested in looking at forests in 3D instead of using optical data to track forest change spatially, we're looking at that third dimension, and that's really important from a carbon perspective. So we all know that we're in, unfortunately, a global climate crisis, right? And I think that this figure from the Global Carbon Project, it's a few years old now, but it's one of my favorite figures they've put out because it's very simple and it has the uncertainties up on the slide. And so we know very well how much CO2 we're pumping into the atmosphere from fossil fuel emissions. We have a really good measurement of that. It's very well tracked in economic markets. So it's a really big number, this sort of 34, but it's plus or minus 2, right? So it's pretty small uncertainty compared to the magnitude of CO2 we're pumping into the atmosphere. And then we can measure what's actually accumulating in the atmosphere with really, really high precision, high accuracy. So we have this atmospheric growth plus or minus 0.2. So we can measure that. We can actually measure CO2. We can map it spatially. We've got really good estimates of that. Where we have much higher uncertainties are how much carbon is being taken from the atmosphere into natural processes, natural sinks, both in the ocean and in the land. But then the largest uncertainty on this entire piece here is how much carbon we're pumping back up to the atmosphere from deforestation and degradation, from land use change. So when you take a forest, cut it down, or it burns, either due to human activities or natural causes, we don't know how much carbon is being pushed up into the atmosphere from that forest loss. And we don't know because we never knew how much carbon was there to begin with. So for almost 50 years now, we've had the wonderful Landsat record that's shown us from space with pretty good certainty when you have a forest and then it disappears, either deforestation, fire, etc. So we can see when forest gets converted to something else, but we didn't know how much carbon was there to begin with. We don't have that third dimension. And that's where the GEDI mission comes in. So finally, we have a satellite that's designed to give us that third dimension, and we're using it to make maps of how much carbon there is in forests now. And then in the future, when we lose those forests, unfortunately, then we'll know how much carbon is being emitted associated with that loss. And hopefully that will help really bring a lot more certainty to these global carbon budgets. And hopefully we will stop losing as much forest because we'll really have a good quantification for the carbon implications of those activities. All right, so that's where the GEDI mission comes in. GEDI is spelled with a G, but pronounced like Star Wars. And so May the Forest be with you is kind of our really nerdy mission slogan. And this was actually a promotional video that NASA put out in advance of the GEDI mission way back in 2018. So at that point, the GEDI mission was coming soon, and it's between NASA and the University of Maryland. And now the GEDI mission has been with us for several years, which is quite exciting. So we launched to the International Space Station back in December of 2018, before COVID was a thing, when times were simpler and we could gather in a group without being worried about it. Hopefully we'll get back to there soon. But here's a subset of the GEDI Science Team at that launch. And it was a really exciting day to see something you had worked on, launched into space, and to like feel the launch power. It went up on a SpaceX Dragon capsule. So SpaceX, this was like in the early days of SpaceX going to the International Space Station. So that was really exciting too. So the rocket went up, and then it was one of those reusable rockets. So then GEDI went off to go to the ISS, and then the rocket came down and it actually fell over. And then all of the press that day was all about the rocket falling over instead of the really exciting science mission that was launched to the space station, but that's fine. So it was really exciting. And so once it was up on the International Space Station, so here's the ISS, it's about a refrigerator-sized box that's plugged into the side of a Japanese experimental modules exposed facility. So like a wing off the International Space Station. And inside that box, we have 3 lasers. One of those lasers is split into 2 beams. So we have 4 beams coming down to the Earth's surface, and then those are bounced back and forth. So that you have 8 ground tracks. So if you look at GEDI data, you'll have these 8 tracks under the International Space Station sampling the ground surface. Each individual laser beam illuminates about a 25-meter diameter circle and returns a waveform from that. So for those of you who aren't familiar with LiDAR, essentially it's just shooting laser beams at things and seeing how long it takes for that beam to come back. And then that tells you the distance between your instrument and your target. So GEDI shoots this laser, and it's comprised of, the laser beam has like a lot of photons in it. And then the first photons, the first bit of light energy, reflects back off the top of the canopy. So it gets back to the International Space Station first, and then the last photons reflect off the ground, and then they get back to the ISS last. And so this is essentially like a time series histogram of reflected photons that you can think of as if you're like looking at a cross-sectional profile of the forest. So the difference between the first photons that come back and the last photons that come back gives you the height of the forest. The area under the curve roughly gives you the canopy cover, the density of that forest. The height of the last return gives you the ground elevation under the forest. So we can use these orange squiggles here. It's near infrared light. You can't actually see it. It's not actually orange. But we use these to map the global ground surface under forests and everywhere else with the bottom of the waveform, global forest heights, canopy cover, and then we also translate them into estimates of forest carbon. So essentially, like the bigger the trees, the bulkier the waveform, the more carbon that forest stores. So that's really what I'm going to be focusing on, kind of in terms of the science story today, is how we turn these squiggles into estimates of forest carbon and above ground biomass. But I wanted to pause and kind of go through my own personal academic background, because this is a forum for early career people. I wanted to tell you how I ended up working on this stuff. So I'm Canadian, and I grew up in Ontario, and I went to undergrad at a university called Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And I was studying environmental science. I was interested in all things about the planet. Wanted to do my part, help prevent a climate crisis, which of course we're in. But I was studying all sorts of different elements of environmental science as an undergrad. And one of the things I did was talk to as many professors as I could. And one of them, Dr. Paul Treitz, who's here holding a diameter tape in his hand, he had a research lab that was using LiDAR to study forests in Ontario. And so I asked him if he had any opportunities for undergrads to get engaged in the research. And he gave me a placement in his lab for a summer when I was an undergraduate student. So I, went into the field and did some measurements. I learned how to do the processing, the basic software stuff. And I kind of got a little glimpse into what it's like to do research. And it's like a bug, right? So you all of a sudden you get really excited about, various questions and curiosities. And it really taught me a lot about the importance of forests in the global carbon cycle. So I knew from then that I wanted to continue on and keep doing research. So I knew I wanted to do a master's degree after my undergrad. And in Canada, the way the school year works is that students kind of do their visits to the different universities for graduate school in February, and then they would go to that graduate school in the fall. And so in February in Canada, I was really interested in studying forests. And so there were two labs I was interested in. One was at the University of Victoria, which is on the west coast of Canada. And one was in Alberta at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And so I went to visit these places. And this is what Victoria looks like in February. It's beautiful. It's right on the ocean. And it's one of like the most temperate places in Canada. And this is what Edmonton looks like in February. It was so cold that no matter how cool the research was, I couldn't bring myself to go to a place with so little natural light and when it was so cold. It's beautiful there in the summer, but this was, this is sort of how people's careers unfold. They make these decisions based on sometimes just the weather of a place. So I went to the University of Victoria for my master's, and I worked with a professor named Olaf Niemann, and then also Mike Walder. And so Olaf did a lot of airborne LiDAR and hyperspectral work, and Mike does a lot of Landsat, sort of more broad stuff across all of Canada, and is involved actually with a lot of NASA missions. So coming out of undergrad, I was really interested in hyperspectral data, actually, more than anything else. I thought that it was so cool that you could use a data set to study how healthy plants were at an airborne or even satellite scale. And so I wanted to look at plant health. That was what I wanted to look at, and then link that to carbon somehow. I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do, but I really thought it was going to be in the hyperspectral mix. And so then when I showed up at UVic, Olaf Niemann here, instead, he said, okay, I know you're interested in that, but I think that there's a really cool opportunity that I would rather you focus on. And this was because he had just been at a conference, I think it was IGARS, and he had met John Ranson there, a friend and colleague of his, who is still at NASA Goddard. And at the time, NASA had just a few years before, this was in 2007, a few years before, NASA had launched ISAT's glass sensor. So this was the first ISAT mission. It had a full waveform LiDAR on it called GLASS, and it was operational between 2003 and 2007. And so Olaf said, John says that there is, for the ice community, they have this new LiDAR in space, and it would be really interesting to see how useful it is for forest stuff. And I really think this is a cool opportunity for you. Not a lot of people are working on this. So I said, okay, sure, I'll totally abandon hyperspectral stuff because that does sound like a good opportunity. So then I spent my master's working with ISAT glass data and trying to use waveform data, actually very similar to GEDI data, to make maps and estimates of forest height and biomass. So I was brand new. I had done some airborne LiDAR, but I had no idea what a waveform was. And I spent my master's kind of really understanding waveform LiDAR and how we can use it for forest applications. So then after that, I was in the last year of my master's, and I went to the American Association of Geographers, AAG conference. And it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. And so it was outside of Canada, which was like kind of exciting for us because usually we would just stay in the Canadian conference circuit. So what happened to be, this is just a random coincidence, I just happened to be presenting my master's research in the same session as Ralph Dubaya, who is now, I've worked with him for 11 years, and he was my PhD supervisor, and he's a very close colleague and friend. But at the time, I had read Ralph's papers, and I was so nervous that I happened to be presenting my research in the same session as him. I was so nervous. So I remember I was very passionate about my research, but to present it to, these world famous scientists at this international conference was really nerve-wracking. So I think I practiced, I don't know, like dozens of times, my little talk. And so when I finally gave it, I felt very confident in it because I had practiced so much, and it impressed Ralph enough that he approached me and offered me a PhD at Maryland. And he said, this is a really exciting place to be because we're linked to NASA Goddard down the road. And at the time, he said, your ISAT work is totally relevant because we have a new mission that NASA's putting out, and it was called Destiny, and it's going to be a LiDAR mission with a radar component, so we can do amazing remote sensing science. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. Sure, I'll come down to the United States and I'll do a PhD with you. And then about one semester into my PhD, you might think, I've never heard of the Destiny mission. And that's because it never actually became a thing. So the Destiny mission got canceled my very first semester of my PhD. And so then I had to sort of take a step back and say, okay, I thought I was going to do satellite LiDAR for my PhD. The ISAT glass sensor, the lasers failed before I got there, back when I was doing my master's. So I ended up doing some airborne LiDAR stuff, some other work on forest allometry for my PhD. So you kind of have to be a bit flexible in these things. And it was very fun. It was great. We were engaging a lot with NASA. And so then after my PhD, I did a postdoc, actually where Sibele is right now, at NASA Goddard with Jim Tucker, who was one of the original kind of inventors of NDVI, which of course is world famous. And so I was supposed to do my postdoc. I wrote a fellowship application to NASA, and it got funded to look at individual tree dynamics in Alaska. So I was like, I'm going back to northern forests. I love them. I love the boreal. We're going to see how forests are recovering from fire, that kind of thing. So that's what I was supposed to do for my postdoc. But then a few months into my postdoc, GEDI got selected by NASA as the next mission. So it was sort of like the LiDAR part of Destiny they brought back to life. And by they, I mean largely Ralph Dubaya, the principal investigator on GEDI. So all of a sudden, I was at Goddard, and Goddard and UMD had this new LiDAR mission, and I knew everybody involved. It's like, great, this is what I'm going to focus my postdoc on. And then I've been working on GEDI and relevant kind of related science questions ever since. So both for a few years at Goddard, and now I'm back at Maryland as a faculty member there, doing a lot of GEDI research. So I just wanted to give kind of my own little history of how I ended up where I am now. It was sort of just going with the flow a little bit, but always focusing on stuff I was interested in. I'm really curious about forest structure. And I think as long as you're working on something you're genuinely curious about, then, it usually works out. So this is some of the research from that master's degree, like way back when I just started getting going with waveform LiDAR. So we were estimating height and biomass with ISAT's glass data, which is very similar to GEDI, except each laser pulse illuminates about a 65-meter diameter circle instead of 25, so a much larger cookie cutter of the Earth's surface. And the area under, so we used airborne LiDAR to kind of validate some of these waveforms, and the area under these curves is the part of the waveform that is from the ground. And we found that this data worked great in British Columbia as long as you had a fairly open forest that was flat. But as soon as you had a slope, and this was on the west coast of Canada, so we had a lot of slopes. So it was quite, mountainous area. As soon as you had a slope, the part of the waveforms that was reflected off the ground, like the bottom of the waveforms, and the part of the waveforms from the vegetation, the top of the waveforms, they kind of got mixed together. And so it became really challenging to use this data for a structure because the ground signal was like messing everything up. And that's largely because those LiDAR shots were illuminating a 65-meter diameter circle. That's like a big area. So if you have a steep slope in a big shot, that's when you get really complicated between the vegetation and the ground signal. And so that's one of the reasons that GEDI was designed with a smaller footprint size. The footprint is the area on the ground that each shot illuminates. So the footprint size for GEDI is like 25 meters. For ISAT glass, it was about 65, as I said. So one of the reasons that it is smaller is because of studies like my master's study that showed that wasn't really the right resolution for studying forests with spaceborne LiDAR. So one of the reasons GEDI is so exciting is that it is the first spaceborne LiDAR designed specifically to study forests. So we're not borrowing data from the ice community, where we have our own data, which is great. And so, as I said, it went up in 2018, and it started collecting science data in 2019. And so at this point, this L1, L2, L4, what that means, these are level products. So for any NASA product, essentially the higher the level, the more processing has gone into the product. So level 1, that's the data of the actual waveforms themselves. So all the squiggles for billions of shots. Level 2 is when we take these waveforms and we process them to estimate height, to estimate canopy cover, etc. And then level 4, which are the brand new ones, this is biomass. So beyond just the height and cover, now we're estimating biomass as well. And we just released that footprint level product, meaning it's the individual shots, just a few weeks ago. So by the end of the GEDI mission, we're going to have, at this point, more than 10 billion cloud-free waveform observations of the Earth's surface. So this is like orders of magnitude more data than we ever had from ISAT glass, and it's designed specifically for forests. So it's pretty exciting. We're already more than halfway there. We have more than 5 billion shots that have been collected so far with GEDI. For those of you who might be familiar with airborne LiDAR, but not satellite LiDAR, so in this bottom left figure here, you can see the individual trees from the airborne LiDAR. This was out on the west coast of the US. That's not what GEDI looks like at all, right? So all GEDI looks like are these squiggles, these waveforms, and those are spatially distributed across the surface. So you can't see the individual tree stuff, but you can do analysis across all of Brazil, all of South America, the whole world. So there's a trade-off between the detail and the spatial scope that GEDI allows. So if you start downloading and looking at the footprint level data, so either the level 2A, 2B, or 4A data, you'll see this spatial distribution. So these are those 8 ground tracks I talked about going under the ISS. And as I said, so GEDI has 3 lasers in that refrigerator-sized box. There's 3 lasers that are firing off as we speak. And one of those lasers is split into these 2 beams. So the data associated with that laser that's been split is called our coverage laser data. And those beams are about a little under half of the power of the full power laser beams. So you have these 2 really powerful laser beams, and then you have one set of 2 beams that are about half power. They're still really useful, but if you want like only like the absolute best data ever, that's the full power laser data. And then if we have the coverage laser essentially to get more spatial coverage, right? So there's a trade-off between sort of the strength of the laser and how much ground can be covered. So the coverage laser is still totally good. It's, during the day, if you have really, really dense canopy cover and like steep slope, the coverage laser data will have a little bit more error than the full power laser data, but usually you can use all of this. So the spatial sample between these ground tracks, so the 8 ground tracks, there's about 600 meters. And then along the ground track, every 60 meters, you get another sample. And there are some places in the world where you have a ton of GEDI data. And then there are some places where you're going to have big gaps. And that's because the International Space Station, it's not like Landsat or MODIS or one of it. GEDI doesn't have its own satellite. So we just go where the International Space Station goes. And sometimes, I don't know if the astronauts are having dance parties, but it gets a little bit wiggly. Sometimes you'll have, you'll just, for whatever reason, the International Space Station will go over the same place again and again and again and totally miss the forest down the road. So it's a little bit of luck what places have GEDI data and what places don't. But I encourage you to look in some area of interest to you and see what data might exist. The other thing is GEDI doesn't get through clouds, so it's a near infrared laser system. So if there's a cloud overhead, it bounces off the cloud instead of off the ground. So in places that have a lot of cloud, there's going to be less useful data. Okay, but there's still a lot of great data for everywhere. So this is an early example of the global gridded topography product. So this is a map of the bottom of the waveforms. And then here's a map of the top of the waveforms minus the bottom of the waveforms, which gives you canopy height. So you can see there are some gaps here. And as these figures are over 6 months old now, as we move forward, we're going to fill in these gaps more and more. So we'll get a better and better picture of the Earth's surface. I will say one very exciting thing is that originally when we proposed GEDI, it was going to be launching in 2018, and it was only going to be a 2-year mission. So it was going to be completed, essentially last year. And it's actually been extended now. The lasers are doing great. There's no science reason to take it off. It's just being on the International Space Station is kind of like renting a place instead of buying a place. So the landlords might kick us off, but it has been extended until January of 2023 at least. So we're hoping it might stay up there even longer, but it will continue to collect data through 2022. Okay, so now I'm going to pivot to talking about biomass. So how do we take those waveforms and turn them into estimates of biomass? And so apologies if this gets a little bit technical, but for those of you who are interested in using GEDI biomass data, I want you to understand kind of what that product is actually all about. So we understood pretty early in the mission that to estimate biomass, you really have to go into the woods and you have to measure some trees. That's how we get estimates of biomass in the field. So literally hugging trees in the field is kind of the way to measure their biomass. Biomass is essentially how big the trees are multiplied by their wood density, their carbon wood density. So we knew we couldn't, there was no funding or time, and this was before a pandemic, to try and get, the whole globe mobilized to go and collect field plots under GEDI waveforms. It wasn't going to happen. So instead, we worked with the international LiDAR community, and we said, anybody who has LiDAR data that has field plot data collected at the same time and place, if you can share your data with us, we can make the airborne LiDAR look like GEDI, and then we can process the simulated waveforms instead of real waveforms. This is like way before GEDI was actually in orbit. So we started this work back in 2000 and when did we start this work? 2015, I think. And so maybe 2016. I think 2015. So we took the airborne LiDAR, we simulated it to make it look like GEDI, and then we processed that as if it was real GEDI, and we built very basic, very simple empirical models to predict biomass as a function of waveform metrics. So it's important to note here that we don't actually measure biomass in the field. So all of our training data that we've collated from all these international partners, they're not true biomass measurements. They're estimates that are generated through the use of what we call allometric models. So essentially, if you want to go in and count how much carbon is in a field plot, you go into the woods, you lay out a plot, and then you measure all the trees in that plot, and you apply these allometric models that say for this tree, so here's a redwood example on the right, this tree is some amount of carbon based on its height, based on its diameter, and based on its species. And so those models, those allometric models, were developed by somebody else. Somebody went and cut down a bunch of trees and actually measured how much biomass they had, dried them out and weighed them, and then made empirical models relating what they had weighed in the lab to measurable attributes of those trees, to the height, species, diameter. So we know that these models, these allometric models that we apply in the field, we know they have huge errors, but there's nothing we can do about that because we can't literally go and hug every tree in the world. We can shoot laser beams at every tree, but we can't hug them, right? So everything we're doing from satellites still comes back to the accuracy of what's available in the woods. Okay, so this is the database that we use for fitting GEDI's models. So this is everywhere where we have people who have gone into the woods, measured trees, and they have airborne LiDAR that we could use to make simulated waveforms. So you can see here, there are a lot of gaps, right? So there's a lot of data. Some places, Brazil has the whole Sustainable Landscapes program with publicly available field and airborne LiDAR data, which was perfect and wonderful to work with. Go into Central Asia, there's literally nothing. We have nothing in Southern South America. So there's all sorts of geographic data gaps we have. And as we move forward with time, we're hoping people will go and make the measurements in these gaps, and then we can make our models and our products so much better. But this is what we had so far. So we took all this data and we divided the world up, because we knew that forests in California are different than forests in the Brazilian Amazon, are different than forests in the dryland areas of Australia. So we know that the world has different forest types growing in different conditions. So we divided the world up by continent and then also by plant functional type. So here we have on the top right, evergreen broadleaf trees. So this is kind of your like tropical broadleaf forest. We have needle-leaf trees, we have deciduous broadleaf trees, and then we have kind of a catch-all of woodland, grassland, shrubland. So like all of the stuff that didn't fit into those other three categories that's kind of on the dry side, we put into its own class. So that's what we did. We took our training database, we divided it up over all of these geographic regions, and we fit empirical models. And so those models are based on the RH metrics in the level 2A product. So if you have looked at GEDI data, that makes some sense to you. If it doesn't, don't worry. Essentially, we take the waveforms and we describe them quantitatively using things called relative height metrics. And these relative height metrics describe the vertical distribution of foliage in the waveforms. So RH 100 is maximum height. RH 50 is kind of like mean height. RH 25 is like the 25th percentile of height, except that it includes the part of the waveform that's reflected from the ground. So they're not quite like percentile heights from airborne LiDAR because they have the ground signal there. So they're relative heights. They're waveform percentiles, not just vegetation percentiles. But they're quite simple, and these have been in the literature for decades now. So these relative height metrics are what we use to predict biomass. And so dividing the world into those four different plant functional types I just mentioned on the left, when we were fitting our models, we were like, let's fit every possible model combination of relative height metrics to predict biomass, all of them that are possible. And what came out was that maximum height, which we knew, relates really well to biomass. So maximum height was important. And then there was some information about the bottom of the waveform that we think is roughly related to canopy cover that was also being picked out as quite important. So maximum height and something about the density of the forests, those are important predictors for biomass. So I wanted to go through a quick Brazilian example to show how these models actually work to predict biomass or carbon. So AGBD here is above ground biomass density. That's what you'll often see reported. So that's the above ground biomass divided by the spatial area you're looking at. And so this is the real model that we apply in the South American evergreen broadleaf tree system. So you take the square root transform of above ground biomass, and then you predict biomass as a function of RH 50 and RH 98, which is kind of close to RH 100. And so it's like maximum height and something similar to mean height. Okay, and so this is a waveform that was collected over the Brazilian Amazon. So it's just one 25-meter shot. If you're looking at a high resolution image of this area, it just looks like dense forest. So who knows how tall it is, right? If you're just looking at the optical image. But with GEDI, we can measure how tall it is, and we can estimate how much carbon it stores. So here we have our waveform. The red line here is where we fit the ground to that waveform. And then the rest of it is the height above ground. And so we take this and we plug in the biomass model here. So we take the RH98 for this waveform is about 29 meters. The RH50 for this waveform is about 19 meters. And you plug that into the equation and you do some statistical back transformation, and you get an estimate of biomass for this waveform of 149 tons per hectare. So that's how much carbon density it has. So that's how simple it is. It's like these basic linear models that we fit for different places in the world. And so then we just repeat this process like 10 billion times, and you get your biomass products. So this, I showed you the elevation and height product. The cover product also exists, which is kind of like the area under the curve. But then we have our biomass map as well. And so we just released the footprint level product for biomass a few weeks ago, back in August, and then a gridded version of that at a 1 kilometer spatial resolution will be released in the next few months. So this is all very active, like it's being generated as we speak. But the really great thing about the GEDI biomass product is not just that, you know, we have this amazing new data stream, but also we have a really statistically robust way of estimating the uncertainties that are propagated up from that footprint model, and then account for the kind of unique spatial sampling of GEDI. So for every 1 kilometer shot, you have some GEDI tracks going through, and essentially you take a very fancy mean for that accounts for the spatial distribution of those shots. So for the 1 kilometer product, we also have a 1 kilometer uncertainty product. And so for that, the whole purpose of these maps is to bring that certainty to the global carbon cycle. So we'll not only say, hey, this is how much biomass we think is there, but if we don't have a very good uncertainty about that, we'll report that. So people will know, hey, this is a place where we have a good measurement of carbon. And over here, we still don't really know. Maybe we need to get some more field data in to improve those models. Okay, I won't spend very long on this, but I just wanted to quickly also mention that there is another NASA LiDAR mission that's exciting. So here is the first 2 weeks of GEDI orbital coverage on the left and the first 2 months on the right. So you can see this is the ISS orbit. It does not go over the poles. And as a Canadian, most of Canada is not being sampled with GEDI, so I felt like I was being a bad Canadian. But also the boreal forest is a really extremely important and dynamic place. So fortunately, there is, borrowing from the ICE community again, a second ISAT mission called ISAT-2. And this is a photon counting mission. So actually, GEDI looks way more like ISAT glass, ISAT-1, than ISAT-2 does. Go figure. But ISAT-2 is collecting data at the same time as GEDI, and it's truly global. And it's not designed for forest structure. It has problems in dense canopies. We know this. But in relatively open canopies, like you find across the boreal, ISAT-2 gives really, really good information. So essentially, we're using ISAT-2 to fill in the part of the world that GEDI doesn't collect data in. And so this is, I just want to spend a few quick little slides on ISAT-2. So instead of waveforms, ISAT-2 kind of looks like discrete return LiDAR, but that is collected forever along a transect. So you get these never-ending transects of photon counting data. So they're counting literally the individual photons rather than waveforms. So it's a really noisy looking point cloud that is a transect that goes forever. So here's some data in British Columbia, actually quite near where I did my master's research. And there is a vegetation product on here that was led by Amy Neuenschwander, a very close collaborator of mine at the University of Texas, Austin. So from ISAT-2, you can fit a surface to the ground, and you can fit a surface to the top of the canopy, and you can estimate canopy heights. And so we're using that data, very similar to how GEDI did it, to make a boreal biomass map. So apologies for the sound. I keep getting buzzes, and I haven't turned that off. All right, so NASA ISAT-2 plus NASA GEDI gives you a global picture of the Earth's forests. And so, of course, there are some differences between GEDI and ISAT-2, which are quite important if you were going to combine them. But for us, we're literally just filling in the part of the globe that wasn't collected with GEDI. And we're just finishing off that map in the next few weeks as well. So that'll be out soon for those of you who might be interested in those northern forests. If you are madly passionate about LiDAR and you're like, great, there's ISAT-2 data, there's GEDI data, we'll use both of those data streams because that's just more data, so that'll be better. Just a few quick caveats that these really aren't very similar data sets. They're both spaceborne LiDAR, but GEDI is a waveform and ISAT-2 is this sort of photon cloud. And they calculate height differently. So both products have relative height metrics, but they're not kind of apples to apples. So you can't just take RH100, well, you can't take like RH50 from GEDI and RH50 from ISAT-2 and just combine them. So just be a little bit careful with that. Largely this is because the part of the waveform that's in the ground is included in GEDI's height metrics, but the photons from the ground in ISAT-2 are not considered in the RH metrics. So it just means there's bias between the two. And also GEDI was designed to penetrate dense canopies and ISAT-2 wasn't. So if you're looking in the dense tropics, often ISAT-2 won't see the ground, and so it'll underestimate the heights over that ground. And then, of course, there are different spatial resolutions, so you have to be aware of that as well. But anyway, if you're interested in combining these, feel free to get in touch with me. All right, so we're making these biomass products. So now I want to talk about how we can make them better and some opportunities for new researchers coming into the field to make a big difference. So as we talked about, maps are only as good as the data used to train them, right? So we don't know how well GEDI is going to do in Central Asia because we don't have any data to explore that. And also we talked about how even where we do have data, the field estimates are estimates, they're not truth, right? So we know there's huge uncertainties, especially in, unfortunately, the places with the most carbon. So the carbon richest places are the places that have the largest uncertainties in carbon. And like those are the places that we really don't want deforested. So we really want to get the numbers right there. And so there's a whole field of research trying to improve these. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to swap out traditional allometric models for new allometric models that are created using terrestrial laser scanning. So instead of going out with just a measuring tape and maybe measuring the height and the diameter of trees, with terrestrial laser scanning, you can measure the trees in 3 dimensions. And you can do with like UAV LiDAR, you can do similar things. So when you can see the entire woody volume of the trees without having to cut it down, you can fit new allometric models without having to cut the trees down. So you can use like a much larger number of trees to train those models. So for those of you who aren't familiar with TLS data, it's beautiful. It's beautiful data. This is an animation by Atticus Stovall, who is collecting some TLS data near us in Maryland with the GEDI TLS. And you can see it like the individual bark structure, you can see the individual trees. It's just absolutely gorgeous data. So compared to the sort of traditional way of doing forest fieldwork, TLS, I think, is really going to open some doors to, well, you can use it for all sorts of different things, but for carbon accounting, I think it's going to really decrease the uncertainty in our field estimates of biomass, which will then improve our satellite models. So that's TLS data, which is kind of fun. And that's one area that I really think is going to increase and strengthen this field in general. And then I focused on GEDI and ISAT-2. Here's some work from Carlos Silva. And the better way to do biomass mapping at a higher spatial resolution will probably not be from one data stream like GEDI or ISAT-2, but a combination of data streams, including a wall-to-wall data stream, such as from the optical data like Landsat, or even better from SAR data, from radar data, which is much more sensitive to forest structure. So we've done some preliminary work on how we could like combine, samples of LiDAR data with wall-to-wall maps of data like NISAR, which is a SAR mission that will launch in 2023 from NASA and the Indian Space Agency. So we really think that the future of biomass mapping will not just be one mission alone. So the GEDI biomass products are awesome, especially because they give us those uncertainty maps, but you can get probably better products combining GEDI with something else. And I think there's a world of opportunity trying to figure out the best way to do this moving forward. That being said, imagine that every single PhD student out there was like, great, we have these new data streams. I want to make a new Google Earth Engine biomass map, right? And so we have like hundreds of maps all of a sudden come online. And if they don't match, it's just going to confuse everybody, especially policymakers who are like, whoa, just give us one map. So we actually got together through the international remote sensing community and put together a protocol that essentially is like, okay, here's how to make sense of biomass maps when they come online. So if you want a really long background on biomass mapping, this is a good document to read. And what we're actually working on right now in the international community is trying to put this, bring this protocol to life a little bit. So we're like, okay, great. We know the guidance. We know how to compare biomass maps as they come out. Let's actually do it and try and improve them. So we've got 2 big international activities going on that have just started kind of this year. One is called GeoTrees, which is all about collecting new reference data airborne LiDAR, terrestrial LiDAR, field data, like traditional field data, but doing it all across the world in a consistent way. And so if any of you are interested in getting involved in GeoTrees, the door is wide open. We want as many participants as possible. And then we also have, between the different space agencies, several biomass maps we're actually producing, and we want to validate them consistently and produce something, one single map that will be much easier for the policy community to use. So just quickly on those activities, this is the GeoTrees activity, and this is just in recognition, like for example, for GEDI, where we have all of these big geographic data gaps with no training data. Similarly, if we have multiple maps in those areas from the different agencies, and if we don't have validation data, we can't tell which map is better where or for what application. So there's this really big, important role for the field and airborne data sets to improve and make sense of satellite products. But we don't have nearly enough data for that. So we have great examples like the Sustainable Landscapes program, like Turn Australia, like NEON in the US. But then there are a lot of places that don't have those, and maybe those aren't being designed or funded long-term. So we want to make sure that that there's like some long-term sustainability in forest reference data collection. So we've created this as a new geo activity called GeoTrees, and we're trying to find funding partners to fund this at a global scale, rather than just countries working within countries. Can we work across all the countries and make sure that we have reference data being collected? So that's one activity we're working on. And I won't get into the details here, but we have like this one sort of recommendation slide of like, if you're going to collect reference data for biomass, try and do it the same everywhere, no matter what country you're in, no matter what ecosystem you're in. So the same field plot size, the same airborne LiDAR type of data, the same terrestrial LiDAR type of data, etc. And these recommendations are in that protocol document. So if you want to do some field work, there's some guidance for you to do that. Okay, and then another activity that we're excited about is trying to take these biomass products and merge them together. So we've got the GEDI biomass product that is coming out in the next few weeks, few months. And then we also have the European Space Agency has a suite of biomass products from their CCI program. And so they're working on a 2020 map that has GEDI inputs. And then NASA JPL has some biomass products. And then we have our boreal biomass product. And then I'm sure maybe some of you will make your own global biomass product soon. I don't know. So for the suite of biomass products we know people are actively working on, we're trying to get together across these different teams and try and understand which products work better where and how we can maybe combine these into something a little simpler for the policy community. So here's a table of some of the old biomass products that were largely using glass data from ISAT. So they're outdated at this point and they had really high uncertainties. But then these blue ones here are new products, and these are what we're trying to combine together. And they include the GEDI biomass product and ISAT2. So this is just like FYI, we're working on not just making one map, but also a framework to combine these maps together and hopefully reduce confusion by the data users. I imagine if I was a policymaker and I was told, oh, you can use satellite laser data to map biomass. That's really cool. I want to use that. And then you're like, yeah, but there's 5 different products for your country and none of them match each other. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. So we're trying to get around that confusion. Okay, and one thing that I think is a really cool trend, both in biomass mapping, but kind of across the board, is this move beyond just open data to open science. So this biomass harmonization activity and actually our boreal biomass map with ISAT2, we're creating on a new open science platform called the Multi-Mission Algorithm and Analysis Platform, or the MAAP, the map. And so this is kind of acknowledging that you can have a biomass product out there, and if people don't understand how it was created, then we can't really improve on it as a global community, right? So this platform was created between ESA and NASA because they both have new or upcoming satellite missions that have data useful for mapping biomass. And so this was designed kind of as this open science tool where when you make a biomass product here, all of the source code gets published with the product. which feels a little vulnerable. Like, what if I made a mistake in my code? But if I made a mistake in my code, I want someone to tell me, because if there's a problem with the map, we want to fix the problem, right? So for people coming into the field, instead of having to learn from scratch how to create all of these products, if you want to just improve them in one little way in one place in the world, you can just take all of the existing code, make your improvement, and then look at the output. So I think that this is like a trend in general in the field toward open science, where everybody shares the code with everybody else. So this platform isn't sort of publicly available yet. It's still in development, but stay tuned for this, because I think that this is an exciting pathway for using and improving NASA data. Okay, so I only have a few more slides, but I just wanted to really highlight that if you're interested in this field, it's an amazing time to get involved, because, yes, we have GEDI, we have ISAT-2, but in 2023, we have 2 new radar missions that are getting launched. ESA's biomass, which is a P-band SAR, and NASA ISRO's NISAR, which is an L-band SAR. And so in combination with the LiDAR we have, with those wall-to-wall SAR data sets, I think that it's going to be like an explosion in improving biomass products. It's really a lot of exciting opportunity here. And then finally, I wanted to end on 2 case studies that are kind of beyond just biomass, right? So you can do a lot with GEDI data or other LiDAR data that is not just mapping how much carbon is where. And so these are a couple of projects that we're working on in our lab that are very biomass relevant, but about trying to answer some science questions or do some actual conservation work with the GEDI data set. So we're actually doing this globally, but because this is a Brazilian talk, I wanted to focus on Brazil. We've been looking at protected areas at a global scale and seeing how effective they are at protecting biomass and protecting carbon. So there's a lot of research out there looking at all of the benefits of protected areas, and we wanted to bring the carbon perspective to it. So for every protected area that has GEDI data, we matched it to a similar ecological area that just isn't protected. And we looked at the difference in forest structure and biomass between the protected area and its sort of matched counterpart. And so just looking at Brazil, on average, we found that the Brazilian protected areas compared to their ecologically similar areas have 24% taller trees, have 53% higher canopy cover, and we're working on estimating the difference in biomass now that the L4A product is available. So the main take home here is that, this is true of the globe actually, but particularly in Brazil, protected areas are effective. They are working, and we probably need more of them. So this is just one application of the type of things you can do with GEDI data that we haven't been able to do before. We're also working on a brand new GEDI Science Team project that is mapping where like all of the carbon hotspots are in the world. So where are the tallest, densest, most carbon-rich forests, and are they protected? And if they're not, can we kind of stress to the international community there's a really good opportunity to protect some more forests that are particularly important for carbon cycling. So we just started this project in January, and we don't have any results to show yet. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the types of applications of GEDI data, especially on the biomass side. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in this stuff, to get going with some GEDI data and to keep in touch with the team. The L4A product is available for download through Earth Data Search. It's on the ORNL DAC, so it's publicly available. All of the NASA data is public. When you're starting to look at this, we do have a user guide that hopefully will be user-friendly and you'll be able to understand it. There's also, for all NASA products, there's an algorithm theoretical basis document, but it sort of like is a written document of a lot of the stuff I presented today, how we actually turn those waveforms into estimates of biomass. There's also some tools for searching, subsetting, and downloading the GEDI data from the DACs. And there's also this wonderful RGEDI package for our users to start working with this data as well. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to anyone who might have been involved with any of the field or airborne LiDAR collection in Brazil or somewhere else. And we do have, just to do the Star Wars theme, we have a GEDI at GEDI Knights account on Twitter. So if you have questions, we try to track those questions from Twitter. You can also email me directly or follow my account on Twitter at Laura Duncanson. So that's all I had. Thank you very much. Well, Sibeli, I can't actually hear you. I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, so thank you very much, Laura, for this incredible presentation. We'll go right now take some time for questions. And just a reminder for everyone, please be sure to type your questions into the question box. And I have a first question. As I force engineering, I'm really interested in force dynamics, drivers, and etc. What I saw that you have mentioned about the map, the multi-mission platform, about new SAR sensors, but how about new LiDAR sensors? Any thought on that? Like, I don't know. We know that LiDAR does a work that just LiDAR provides us, so a type of data. Do you have any thoughts about new LiDAR spaceborne sensors missions, the continuity of the GEDI mission, something like that? Do you have any thoughts and think to talk about this?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah. So ISAT-2 and GEDI, the lasers themselves, essentially when you put something in space, the lasers eventually are going to burn out. They have a lifetime, so they're designed for some lifetime. So the GEDI lasers are alive and well. The GEDI lasers, I think, we're going to outlast how long we're allowed to stay on the International Space Station. We're going to get booted off at some point, probably before the lasers die. So hopefully GEDI will stay up there until 2023. But then, yeah, it's an excellent question. What happens after that if you want to have a time series, right? So we're hopeful that there will be other missions that do fill that space. Through the Japanese Space Agency, they have a proposal for a mission called MOLI, which is actually very, very similar to GEDI. It's a little bit of a different like spatial arrangement of the footprints. And we don't know when it would launch. It hasn't been finally approved, but the mission concept is to have another full waveform LiDAR on the International Space Station. So that would be going up there, hopefully around the time GEDI would stop, and it would be from the Japanese Space Agency. So that we're hopeful for. Beyond that, in kind of how NASA makes its decisions for what satellites get launched, they have this decadal survey process where every 10 years they put out this whole survey of like what are the most important things for us to put in space to understand our changing planet given our science priorities. And so there is a potential opportunity in some new. So essentially, people are proposing mission concepts for new LiDARs right now. And so there are a couple of different ideas floating around the community, but nothing set in stone. So hopefully we get something that is somewhat similar, maybe even an improved version of GEDI that will be going up, I don't know, the end of this decade or something like that. But it's very kind of early days, so it's just in the discussion. But I think in general, the more people are using these data and publishing papers with these data and showing that they're very useful, showing their strengths and limitations, the more likelihood it is that the space agencies will be able to build new missions to put into space to keep the time series alive.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Yeah. I really would like to see more LiDAR on space. So yeah, it would be amazing.
Me too.
Yeah. So Rodrigo, do you have a question for Laura right now?
Yes. First, thank you very much for the outstanding and informative presentation, and also for sharing your career path with us, which is also very encouraging for keep working hard and working what we like. And I just wanted to ask you a little comment on if there is any quality or any assessment we should do before using the GEDI products for our specific study sites, and to test if the time of the day or you comment on the coverage beam or anything is affecting our data in our specific sites?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So on the data product itself, there's a data quality flag. So you can use that flag to essentially filter out, data we know that there's a problem with. And so it's kind of a combination of a lot of different filters that we've applied. But there's a flag in there that, for example, is if we know that the allometric model in the field is being applied outside of its range, then there's a flag for that. If we know that there was some atmospheric contamination, there's a flag. So you can, all of those like kind of issues are kind of combined into the L4A quality flag, which is different than the lower level quality flags. If there's like if the atmosphere is really bad and there's a flag for like L2A and L2B, that will still be in the L4A flag as well. If we're like, please don't use this data, then it should be filtered out using that quality flag. But then there's some extra ones that are very biomass specific as well. And so you can read about those in the user guide. But also, these are preliminary data set. Like this is the very first version 1. So we know that there's going to be some problems. There's going to be some places where we thought it would work and the community is going to be like, it didn't, you got it wrong. And so we do want to know about that. And so reasons that it could be wrong or could be in like a dense forest, if we're not picking up where the ground is properly, so the relative height metrics have errors, then we might be either over or underestimating biomass. And so that's one thing, is like the actual waveform processing. But then also if you're looking at a place that's really far away from anywhere we had training data, like most of our training data in Brazil was from the Sustainable Landscapes program, which was kind of focused more on those sort of recovering secondary forests. So we might have a little bit of an issue there. We do have a lot of data from more mature intact forests in like French Guiana, but there are places in Brazil where we don't know what it was. So if you find that like the biomass that you're seeing in GEDI doesn't match what you're seeing in terms of the distribution in the field, please do let us know. And maybe that's a place where we can prioritize putting in new field data. And one of the cool things about how we've set up the GEDI biomass models is that the database never goes stale. So as we get new training data in, we can use it to simulate GEDI, and we can add it to our database and we can reproduce our maps. So the version right now is version 1. There's going to be a version 2, a version 3. We're going to improve on the GEDI biomass products as we go. And the more interaction we can have with the user community, the better the new products will be. So for now, first, use the data quality flag. Then if it's looking really weird, maybe filter out the coverage data that was collected during the daytime. But then if it still looks weird, I don't know, get in touch with GEDI Nights on Twitter and maybe we can figure out a way to improve it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. So it looks like we have some questions from the audience. So the first question is from Flavia de Souza Mendes. And first, she said, thanks for the great presentation to generate the biomass product. Did you use any biomass plots at the edge of the forest fragments or in biomes transitions areas, for example, between Cerrado and Amazon? She said this because she has studied the fragmentation and edge effects in ecotomies, and there is a large decrease of biomass carbon at the edge of these forest fragments in the first 100 meters, but they are not estimating global biomass carbon maps. Therefore, I didn't know, but do you have something to mention about that? Therefore, the maps may be underestimating the total biomass.
Sure, yeah. So in terms of the training data, so we have like our training data model. And so I think I can't comment specifically on whether there were like training samples that were at that edge. Again, in Brazil, it mostly was from the Sustainable Landscapes program. So I don't know how close to that tone transition those training data sets would be. But we also, we train our models with this global database. And so as long as the relationship between forest biomass and waveform structure is consistent across that transition, then those models should be applicable. And we don't have a forest, non-forest map for GEDI for the actual biomass gridded product. So we're applying those models to all of the GEDI shots. So it doesn't matter if they're like at the edge of a forest, at the inside of the forest, we apply them across all of those shots. And so for the gridded product, those will include data across that whole transition, across the whole Cerrado, across like the whole transition between those ecosystems. The question is whether the relationship between the waveforms and biomass is similar in that to where we've trained the data. And if it isn't, then, I mean, this sounds like like Flavia, that would be an amazing collaboration or a research project to see how representative our models are of that geographic domain, because I don't know. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, that's amazing. It's a great point to think about, on the transitions and the edge. Thank you, Flavia, for your question. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Rodrigo, do you want to conduct the next?
Yeah, I think there's a next question from the audience. It's from Sajid Salim. Excuse me if I didn't pronounce it right. The question is, can we estimate the biomass from Google Earth Engine?
Yeah, great question. We do get this quite a lot because Google Earth Engine is such an amazing tool, right? And a lot of people can access it from all over the world. So there are some strengths and limitations of Google Earth Engine. At this point, there is an asset in Google Earth Engine for the level 2A product, which has the waveform metrics in it. And Sean Healy's group, who's on the GEDI Science team, is largely leading, making sure that that data is ingested into Google Earth Engine. At this point, the level 4 data is not in there. It takes some time for Google to ingest new assets, and that's essentially if the community's asking for them, then they'll put the time in to make sure those assets are pulled over. So at this point, the GEDI biomass data is not in Google Earth Engine. But I think it's on its way. One of the tricky things about using LiDAR data in Google Earth Engine is it's Google Earth Engine's really kind of primarily designed for raster-based data, so for these wall-to-wall maps, and so for like Landsat data processing, for the SAR stacks, etc. But for the sample data we have for GEDI, it's a little bit more challenging to use it in the way that they have the infrastructure set up. So it's not impossible, and certainly, there's going to be more and more opportunity, I think. I know that they do have the intention to have the biomass product over there, but I think the gridded biomass product will be a lot easier for Google Earth Engine to ingest and also for users to start using. So stay tuned for that 1 kilometer product. But I do know that there is a plan to have the level 4A data ported over. It's not like the most user-friendly data to use the sample data in there with the kind of way Google Earth Engine set up.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, so we have another question from Murilo Silva, and he asked, what is better to calibrate, areas with primary forests or areas with second forests with lots of regeneration there?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. So yeah, these are the types of questions that I think the first data sets will help answer, right? So we think that the most important thing is to capture the entire gradients of forest structure from zero biomass up to the densest forest possible, and to capture the distribution that we would expect in geographically all over the place. So I don't think you can ignore either, but we definitely want to make sure that we're sampling across that gradient. And we know that we're not, right? We know there are places where we've had no training data in whole, we're missing some of the carbon richest forests. We're missing, there's nothing, I think south of Brazil in our entire training data set. So I don't know how well we're going to do down there. So to answer your question, I think it's important to do both, but we really are very limited with the training data we have available. And that's where that GeoTrees program comes in, is to try and stimulate new data collections that are more sort of geographically representative. So great question, and I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah, but I think the range to capture the whole range is a good answer for that. Yeah, like from 0 to the maximum of. Yeah, thank you. So Rodrigo, go ahead.
Yeah. The next question is from Jose.
Well, I think I think he's not here now. Yeah, so I will proceed with this next question, which is the special. It's from Jose Marcato. Which is the spatial resolution of the biomass product 1 kilometer? More data until 2023 can provide better resolution for this product.
Yeah, great question. So 1 kilometer is the resolution of the sort of first product. And so with that 1 kilometer cell, we aggregate the samples within that cell. And so as we have more and more data come online, you're completely right. We'll have more and more samples to fill up those cells. But there is not a plan for the GEDI mission to produce a higher resolution product. It'll essentially, as we have more and more samples, the uncertainty of that 1 kilometer product will get lower and lower. If you want to make a higher resolution product, the best way is going to be taking GEDI data and using it to train some other data set that has that higher spatial resolution. So there's some work through Sean Healy's group and Matt Hansen's group for making 30-meter products with training GEDI to the Landsat archive. Through Maryland, there's a link between GEDI and Tandem X data to make a 1 hectare product for some tropical areas. And then as we get those SAR missions in 2023, I think 1 hectare is the plan for those maps as well, that will hopefully take the GEDI data and then use it, spatially extend it with the SAR wall-to-wall data. So if we went for just the GEDI product and we made a higher resolution map, you'd have more and more cells that have no data in it, just because of the ISS. Like, there's always going to be some places with gaps. And even with our first 1 kilometer map, there are going to be some 1 kilometer cells that just have 0 GEDI samples in them. So we don't have an estimate there. So if we went to higher spatial resolution, we'd have more cells with no data. So 1 kilometer will be the spatial resolution for the GEDI gridded product, but there are a lot of other products that'll be coming out with higher spatial resolutions through Fusion.
Great. Rodrigo, can you do this?
Yes,
the next,
my connection broke, sorry.
No, it's fine.
So next question is from Charlotte Zoe Smith. Are there any plans for maps to be produced that estimate canopy height or biomass in data gaps where GEDI has not yet taken transects?
Yeah, perfect. So that's kind of similar to my last answer. So yeah, data fusion is how to sort that out. So by, with Landsat, of course, Landsat has some issues with biomass. It saturates, it's optical, so it doesn't see through clouds. But with the SAR data sets, there certainly is great opportunity there. So great question. And I feel like that's one of the areas there's going to be a lot of cool research, and hopefully many of you can engage in that.
Nice.
Great.
Nice. The next question is from Daniel Gomes. He asked, I would also like to know if you are using any of Landsat-based biomass estimates on that this mission has such a large time series.
Yeah. So again, that's Matt Hansen's group and Sean Healy's group are both engaged in linking the GEDI sample data with the Landsat data. And then you can, perfect questions, right? These last two, because you can look at the time series, going back into time a little bit. So the general concept there is, if you know the biomass in 2020 from GEDI, and you can make a GEDI to Landsat model for 2020, then you can apply that model back in time and look at the biomass dynamics. We've been doing that a little bit in East Africa, looking at charcoal production dynamics with the time series. It is a little challenging. There is a geolocation uncertainty on GEDI that is about 10 meters right now. It was higher for the earlier versions. it can't get really better than 7 meters. So when you're linking a small shot to a Landsat pixel, there's just going to be a little bit of wiggle between the two, which if you have a really heterogeneous area, it will cause some uncertainty to your model just because of spatial uncertainty. So do, be a little bit careful if you're linking GEDI to Landsat. You are going to have some errors associated with that. But it's a really cool approach to start looking at the time series dynamics. So yeah, it'd be cool to see some examples coming out of Brazil that do GEDI Landsat fusion.
Great, thank you.
Next question is also from Daniel Gomes. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to know if you have any optical partnership to GEDI data, like any Landsat product or hyperspectral mission that you are already using.
Yeah, so I think just the Landsat ones. For hyperspectral, we haven't really been doing much there. That's like a little bit more cutting edge. The Landsat's kind of a little bit more well developed. So I think that there's some cool research opportunities. We have NASA's Surface, it's currently called Surface Biology and Geology Mission, SBG, which is an upcoming hyperspectral mission. So linking LiDAR to that kind of data stream might be really interesting down the track. But there hasn't been a ton of kind of like satellite LiDAR hyperspectral fusion, but a lot of Landsat. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. We are working on data, not exactly fusion, but to analyze the drivers of change in biodiversity, like structural biodiversity from GEDI and functional biodiversity from disease, Prisma data. So I'm so excited in the work I'm doing right now in NASA. Exactly join these two newest technologies, and I think there are lots of great works to be done, ongoing works. Yeah, so this will be an amazing decade for remote sensing, for fusion, LiDAR, and hyperspectral. I'm so excited to be part of this.
Yeah, thanks, Sibylla. I should have said, yeah, other than Sibylla's work, there's not that much I know of, but that's more your research expertise doing the.
No, yeah,
but
yeah, I'm just starting to work with these new technologies, and they are definitely really excited. So I'm so really excited about this. So yeah, let's see what we have from these fusion projects. Yeah. So I think the last question from the audience. So the question is from, I'm sorry, but I don't know exactly, Kizaba Zoltan. Did you do a study about the accuracy of the GEDI data in mountains areas compared to plains? Does the slope or whole terrain affect the LiDAR waveform?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, that's definitely something we saw a lot with the ISAC glass data, right? So so that's one of the reasons that we had the smaller footprint with GEDI, was to try to minimize those uncertainties, because you're completely right. Over a steep slope, you essentially get this slight mixing of the ground signal. Like if you have, if my hand is a slope and you have a tree down here, right? So then the top of this tree will be at the same elevation as the ground here. And so like the steeper the slope, the more mixed the ground and the canopy signals will be. So we know that it's going to cause a bit of a problem, but for GEDI, because of that higher spatial resolution compared to glass, it's a much lower problem than it was for glass. So there have been some preliminary analyses that have been going on with the mission team. So certainly it increases the uncertainty, but it's not as problematic as the predecessor. So I think that some papers that look at that explicitly in different areas of the world would be really helpful. I haven't seen the analysis done like as a function of canopy cover as well as slope. So I think that seeing some of that, especially in a place like Brazil, would be really helpful. But yeah, so in theory, less of a problem than it was with glass, but we look forward to seeing some papers that show that uncertainty due to slope in different geographic domains.
Yeah, so yeah, it looks like we have covered all of our questions, but Dr. Laura, is there anything else you want to cover before wrap up? Something you want to say?
Well, no, I mean, it's just, I would say that I'm kind of envious of people who are just starting out in this. Like, I would love to be starting my PhD right now with all of the exciting new data streams. There's just so much to discover. And I really do feel like we're very fortunate in our field with all of this open data that, and with these new exciting, like, sort of cloud-based tools from the comfort of your own home, thankfully, because of COVID, where most of us are. You, from your laptop, you can make like a truly new discovery on any given day. So it's just very, very exciting to be doing this research. But I think that bringing like new creative ideas, fresh perspectives as early career scientists, I'm a little envious. It's an exciting time to be starting out. So that's all I kind of had to say. But thank you so much for participating and for all of your great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Rodrigo, do you have any additional comments? Something to say?
No, I just want to thank you too for Dr. Duxon for the presentation, everything. Maybe if she want to give you some advice or something for who are starting or who are starting the PhD and to work with this stuff. Any skill, any programming language, is it necessary? Is it required? What are the things if we're starting now? So I will need to go to understand a little bit of this skill or that. Just as maybe a general comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. I think you kind of nailed it there. Coding is the most important thing, and I think it's largely because the software that's available in ArcGIS, QGIS, and that's always going to be behind the new missions, because it's of course going to take time to make the new products and analyze them, and then to develop the software tools. So as much, even though it can be a little bit daunting at first when you get into coding, it's really, really important. I would say Python and R are primarily the languages that people are using in our field. I taught myself IDL when I started doing this, because that was kind of what people were using for ISAC glass data at the time. And just don't be shy about it. Like, everybody starts somewhere, so you can teach yourself how to program with all of the amazing information online. Every single day I'm Googling how to do some other code thing, right? So like that never gets old. But I would encourage you not to be shy about learning how to code. And then also, just try and take opportunities when they present themselves. Like, everybody started somewhere. I remember I used to be extremely intimidated by all of these sort of like famous professors at NASA. And now that you get to know them, it's like, oh, everyone's just a human, and we're all, curious about the work we're doing. And we're all just trying to kind of make the world a better place in some way. So there's a lot of opportunity to work in people's labs. If you happen to just be curious about something, just email them and see if maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate. Most times people get really excited about that, and that might end up being what pivots your entire career into a different direction. So yeah, just trying to stay engaged with the community. Right now it's hard with COVID, but trying to go to international conferences if at all possible, because that is kind of where some of those connections and friendships start. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's amazing. It was amazing to hear this, and thank you very much for the answer and for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Laura. So I would like to announce the next webinar that will be on change detection in the era of deep learning. It will be given by Dr. David Stuya from EPLFL, the Switzerland, on October 7, 9 a.m. GMT less 3, so the same time at this webinar. So this was a great time. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Veraldo, for the invitation. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.